The great marble halls of the Xiphorian palace had seen their share of triumphs, coronations, and cosmic alliances. Tonight, however, they bore silent witness to something far less celebrated. Princess Lysella, heir to the throne, kneeling in quiet despair before the High Council. "The tests have been conclusive," intoned the grand geneticist, his voice void of emotion. "Princess Lysella carries the Malveth defect. She will never bear an heir." The chamber, filled with Cypher's nobility, remained eerily silent. Then a murmur rippled through the gathering, a mixture of disappointment, scandal, and unspoken political maneuvering. Lysella, clad in her ceremonial robes of deep violet, lifted her chin but could not stop the cold wave of humiliation washing over her. Her mother, Queen Azareth, did not so much as flinch. The queen's expression was carved from stone, her golden irises betraying nothing. But Lysella knew, she knew, that behind that mask of royal dignity, her mother was already considering how to minimize the damage. Without an heir, one of the council members finally spoke. "The stability of the throne is at risk." Lysella's fingers tightened into fists. "As if I am nothing more than a vessel for succession." It was not her fault. The Malveth defect was a rare genetic condition that affected less than 0.01% of Xiphorian females, rendering them incapable of producing viable offspring. No treatment, no cure. Just a cold, immutable fact written in her very DNA. "Then we must consider an alternative means of succession," said Lord Vareth, a noble whose ambitions were as transparent as his disdain for Lysella. "Perhaps a cousin or—" "I am not yet finished." The queen's voice cut through the chamber, silencing everyone. She rose from her throne, her gaze sweeping the room like a blade. "Science has advanced far beyond what was known in past generations. If there is any possibility of reversing this defect, we must pursue it." Lysella's heart skipped. Was her mother actually willing to fight for her? The grand geneticist folded his many arms. "With respect, Your Majesty, Xiphorian medicine has no means to repair the Malveth defect. That is because you assume the solution must be Xiphorian." A silence fell. The implications were staggering. The Xiphorian Empire prided itself on its scientific supremacy. Seeking help from another species, especially the humans, those reckless primates, was an insult to their medical elite. And yet, that was precisely what the Queen intended. "There is one," the Queen continued, turning her gaze toward Lysella, "a human doctor, a specialist in fertility manipulation and genetic reconstruction. If anyone can achieve the impossible, it is him." Lysella swallowed hard. Dr. Marcus Hale. She had read his name in the reports. A controversial figure in human medical circles, brilliant, unorthodox, and prone to pushing ethical boundaries in ways that made even Earth's scientific community nervous. Lysella exhaled slowly. If this was her only chance, then so be it. "Find him," the Queen ordered. "Bring him to Xipher." Dr. Marcus Hale was not a man easily impressed. He had spent years in some of the most advanced research facilities on Earth, had tinkered with genetics in ways that would have made his predecessors weep, and had even faced tribunals over the morality of some of his experimental procedures. But standing aboard the Royal Xiphorian vessel, being escorted through corridors shimmering with bioorganic architecture, he had to admit, this was a whole new playing field. The princess herself was waiting for him in the private medical wing of the palace. She was taller than he expected, with the signature Xiphorian iridescent skin, but it was her eyes that caught him. Gold, luminous, but also tired. She extended a hand. "Dr. Hale." "Your Highness," he replied, shaking it. Xiphorians weren't big on physical touch, so the gesture was significant. "Let's get to work," she said. Over the following weeks, Marcus dissected everything the Xiphorian scientists had gathered. Their work was precise, methodical, flawless in its analysis of why she was infertile. But therein lay the problem. They had spent so much time proving it was impossible that no one had tried to solve it. Marcus had a different approach. "Your people think in absolutes," he told Lysella one night as they pored over data. "Humans? We cheat. We find loopholes." She raised an elegant brow. "And do you have a loophole for this?" He smirked. "I might. It was risky, of course. His plan involved altering her very genetic code, not simply fixing a defect, but rewriting her biological structure to accommodate a new fertility framework. It was something only attempted in theoretical models back on Earth. If it worked, she would be the first living proof of genetic metamorphosis on such a scale. And if it failed, well, best not to think about that. Lysella, however, was not one to balk at the impossible. She was Zyphorian royalty. She had spent her entire life being told what she could and could not do. This time, she chose to defy expectations. As the experiments progressed, something changed between them. At first, it was purely professional. She was his patient. He was her doctor. But the late nights, the shared defiance against the skeptics, the way he spoke to her, not as a broken heir, but as a person, created something dangerous between them. One night, after another long session in the lab, Lysella let herself ask, "Why did you take this job, Marcus? Was it for the prestige? The challenge?" He hesitated. Then, with an exhale, he admitted, "I wanted to prove that even the impossible can be undone." A pause. "And because," he added, quieter, "I think you deserve a chance." Lysella's breath caught. She shouldn't feel this way. He was human. Their worlds were not meant to mix in such ways. But when she placed her hand over his, neither of them pulled away. When the first signs of success appeared, the tiniest flicker of change in her genetic markers, the palace was in uproar. The nobility was scandalized. The grand geneticist was furious. Lord Vareth declared it an abomination. And the queen? The queen watched. "Are you certain?" she asked Marcus, her gaze piercing. Yes. He had never been more certain of anything in his life. But not everyone wanted this outcome. Not everyone wanted Lysella to succeed. The night before the final stage of the procedure, an assassination attempt nearly took her life. And that was only the beginning. The palace corridors were eerily silent at night, save for the faint hum of the biolights pulsing through the walls. Dr. Marcus Hale had grown used to their rhythmic glow, finding it almost soothing after weeks of relentless work. But tonight, something was wrong. The lights flickered. A subtle change in air pressure. Marcus barely had time to register the shift before the chamber doors slid open with a hiss. A shadow moved, quick, silent. His body reacted before his mind did. A sharp, metallic whir. Instinct took over. He dove to the side just as a blade slashed through the space where his throat had been. An assassin, clad in the deep violet armor of the Zyphorian Royal Guard, but there was no mistaking the intent. This wasn't a palace protector. This was a killer. Marcus rolled, grabbed the first thing he could, an instrument tray, and flung it at his attacker. The assassin dodged effortlessly. No wasted movement. No hesitation. A professional. Damn it. I'm a scientist, not a soldier. The assailant lunged again. A glint of a plasma dagger. Marcus barely managed to twist away, but pain ignited across his shoulder as the blade grazed him. Then, a sudden, deafening crack. The assassin jerked, body convulsing as a searing bolt of energy struck center mass. The air smelled of burnt flesh. Marcus turned, breathing heavily. Lysella stood at the doorway, pulse rifle in hand, golden eyes burning. "Are you hurt?" she demanded, stepping forward. Marcus pressed a hand to his bleeding shoulder. "I'll live." He nudged the corpse with his foot. Not so sure about him, though. Lysella's gaze was steel. That was no ordinary assassin. "I figured." She knelt, fingers brushing the insignia on the armor. Her expression darkened. "This is the mark of House Vareth." Marcus exhaled sharply. "Of course it is." Word of the attack spread like wildfire through the palace. Queen Azareth wasted no time summoning the High Council. Lord Vareth arrived looking composed, but Marcus didn't miss the flicker of annoyance in his expression as he took his place in the council chamber. "An attack on the princess," the queen said, her voice cold as deep space. "In her own palace. An unforgivable offense." Vareth inclined his head. "A tragedy indeed, but let us not make hasty accusations." Lysella stepped forward. "One of your men tried to kill me." Varetha's expression did not change. "A rogue agent, perhaps, but I assure you, princess, I do not order assassinations. If I wish to challenge your claim, I would do so legally. Lysella's fists clenched, but the queen raised a hand. You play a dangerous game, Vareth. Vareth smirked. I only play by the rules of power, your majesty. Marcus watched the exchange carefully. It was political theater, but beneath it was something real, something deadly. Lysella wasn't safe. And if they continued this research, things would only get worse. Assassins wouldn't stop them. Political games wouldn't stop them. The final stage of Marcus's procedure was ready. For weeks, he had been refining the genetic rewrite, carefully introducing modified human stem cells to interact with Lysella's Zyphorian biology. A hybrid approach, melding Earth's advancements in fertility science with alien physiology in a way that had never been attempted before. Theoretically, it should work. Theoretically. Are you ready? Marcus asked, standing beside Lysella in the sterile glow of the medical chamber. She met his gaze. I trust you. He hesitated. This will change you, Lysella. It's not just about fixing the defect. Your body will be different. Your genetics, your inheritance. I know. She placed a hand on his arm. But I have lived my whole life as the broken heir. If this works, I will be more than they ever expected. Marcus exhaled, then nodded. The procedure began. Hours passed in a blur of data streams, biosynthesis, and cellular restructuring. Lysella lay within the incubation pod, her body suspended in the thick gel that facilitated the genetic rewrite. Marcus monitored the readings, adjusting the process in real time. If anything went wrong, there would be no second chance. Her vitals fluctuated. A spike in neural activity, a rapid acceleration in cellular adaptation. Then, a shudder ran through the entire system. The pod's containment field flickered. Marcus's heart pounded. Come on, he muttered, fingers flying over the controls. The readings stabilized. Lysella's body accepted the changes. Then, for the first time in Zyphorian history, the genetic marker for the Malveth defect disappeared. It worked. Lysella woke with a sharp intake of breath. She sat up, disoriented. But the moment her feet touched the floor, she felt it. A difference. A shift in her very being. Marcus watched carefully. How do you feel? She flexed her fingers. Stronger. A pause. Then, a slow smile. It worked. But before they could celebrate, the alarms blared. Marcus's stomach dropped. Not now. Lysella was already moving. She grabbed a robe, ignoring the lingering dizziness, and strode toward the door. Outside, the palace was in chaos. Vareth had made his move. Elite forces, bearing the sigil of House Vareth, stormed the halls. Courtiers ran for cover. Guards clashed in brutal combat. The coup had begun. Lysella and Marcus barely had time to arm themselves before a wave of soldiers crashed through the corridor. Lysella fought with the grace of a trained warrior, her pulse rifle finding targets with lethal precision. Marcus, less refined but no less desperate, fired shot after shot, adrenaline carrying him through the chaos. We have to get to the queen, Lysella shouted. But as they rounded the corner, a towering figure blocked their path. Lord Vareth. Flanked by his personal guard, the noble-turned-rebel regarded them with cold amusement. A shame, he said. I had hoped to handle this more delicately. Lysella raised her rifle. You will never take the throne? Varetha's smirk widened. Oh, princess, you still don't understand, do you? He gestured, and his soldiers stepped aside. Behind them, bound and kneeling, was Queen Azareth. Blood dripped from a cut on her temple. Her golden eyes met Lysella's, defiant, unbroken. Vareth leaned in. The throne is already mine. Lysella's heart pounded. Marcus tensed beside her. And then Vareth gave the order. Kill them. The moment the order left Lord Varetha's lips, time fractured into chaos. Blaster fire ripped through the air. Lysella dove behind a marble pillar, her pulse rifle humming as she fired back with deadly precision. Marcus barely had time to react before she grabbed his arm and yanked him into cover with her. Varetha's elite soldiers advanced, weapons blazing. The palace walls, once pristine and bathed in regal light, now sizzled with the scorch marks of battle. The scent of burning ozone filled the corridors. Marcus pressed his back against the pillar, his heart hammering. This was not how I thought my life would go. Lysella's voice was steady, though he could hear the anger beneath it. We can't stay here. They'll pin us down. Marcus risked a glance. Queen Azareth was still restrained, her gaze fierce despite the blood at her temple. Vareth stood before her, untouched, watching the battle unfold with calm amusement. We need to get to her, Marcus said. Lysella nodded. Follow my lead. Then she moved, fast, fluid, a blur of violet robes and lethal precision. She fired in quick bursts, each shot finding its mark. The first soldier fell with a seared hole through his chest. The second barely had time to react before her blade, elegant, curved, a relic of Zyphorian royalty, sliced through his throat. Marcus scrambled after her, keeping low, firing whenever he could. He wasn't a soldier, but desperation made for a quick learner. A guard lunged at him. Marcus barely had time to bring his weapon up, but the soldier knocked it aside. They collided, and suddenly Marcus was locked in a brutal struggle. The guard was stronger, but Marcus had human unpredictability. He drove his knee up, catching the soldier in the ribs. The Zyphorian staggered, just enough for Marcus to grab the fallen pulse rifle and fire point-blank into his chest. The soldier crumpled. Marcus exhaled sharply. I just killed someone. No time to dwell. Lysella was already on Varetha's last line of defense, her strike sharp and merciless. The last guard fell, leaving only Vareth himself. He sighed as if disappointed. You truly are your mother's daughter. Lysella leveled her weapon at him. Let her go. Vareth tilted his head. No. Then he pulled a hidden blade from his sleeve, sleek, laced with neurotoxin, and pressed it against the queen's throat. Drop your weapon, he said smoothly, or your mother dies. Lysella's pulse pounded. She knew Vareth. He was not bluffing. But Queen Azareth, despite her capture, was no passive ruler. Her golden eyes locked onto Lysella's. There was no fear in them, only command. Then, without warning, the queen moved. With a sharp twist, she slammed her head backward into Varetha's face. The crack of cartilage breaking echoed through the chamber. Vareth cursed, his grip loosening just enough. Lysella didn't hesitate. She fired. The shot hit true. Vareth staggered, clutching his side as dark Zyphorian blood spilled between his fingers. He snarled, eyes blazing with fury, but before he could react, Lysella was already on him. She kicked his blade aside and drove the butt of her rifle into his gut. He collapsed to one knee, coughing. You've lost, Lysella said, her voice quiet but lethal. Vareth looked up at her, something almost amused flickering in his eyes. Have I? Then, with a twisted smirk, he pressed a control panel on his wrist. Alarms screamed through the palace, and outside the great glass windows, the night sky burned as warships descended upon the city. Marcus stared in horror. He had backup. Lysella's grip tightened around her weapon. Of course he did. Outside, Varetha's loyalists, hidden factions within the military, launched their attack. Bombardments rained down on the capital, targeting strategic locations, the royal fleet hangars, the communication hubs, the palace defenses. Explosions lit up the sky. Vareth coughed, smiling through the pain. You should have accepted your place, princess. Now your entire world will burn. Lysella didn't hesitate. She shot him. The blast struck his chest, sending him sprawling. He gasped, eyes wide with shock, then went still. Marcus blinked. You just... He was dead the moment he threatened my mother. Lysella turned sharply. We need to get to the central command. Azareth, now freed, straightened. No, we need to leave. Lysella stiffened. What? The queen's expression was grim. The capital is lost. If we stay, we die. Marcus looked between them. So where do we go? Azareth's golden eyes turned to him, sharp as a blade. We take what remains of our forces, and we prepare for war. The escape was a blur of battle and fire. Lysella, Marcus, and the queen fought their way through the collapsing palace, rallying loyalists where they could. By the time they reached the royal docks, the enemy was closing in. Marcus didn't look back as he sprinted onto the waiting ship, his pulse still pounding. This wasn't his fight. He was just a doctor. a scientist. But as he looked at Lysella, her face streaked with blood and defiance, her body forever changed by the procedure he had given her. He knew there was no going back. The doors sealed. The ship roared to life. As they ascended into the void, Marcus turned his gaze to the burning planet below. This was just the beginning. In the quiet of the ship, Lysella sat beside Marcus in the dimly lit control room. "I was supposed to save my people," she murmured. "Instead, I doomed them." Marcus shook his head. "No, you gave them hope." She looked at him then, really looked at him. "Marcus, I'm different now. My body, my genetics. I don't even know what I am anymore." He met her gaze. "You're Lysella. That hasn't changed." A silence stretched between them. Then she spoke again, voice barely above a whisper. "I think I'm pregnant." Marcus's breath caught, and somewhere, out in the endless void, a war began. Silence. For the first time since the palace fell, since the fire consumed her world, Lysella sat motionless, her breath shallow, her thoughts a tangled storm. The words had slipped from her lips before she had even fully processed them. "I think I'm pregnant." Marcus stared at her, his expression frozen between shock and something unreadable. The glow of the ship's control panel cast harsh shadows across his face. Outside the viewport, the shattered remnants of her home world drifted against the void, burning wreckage silhouetted by the distant stars. It had only been hours since their escape, and already, everything had changed. "You," Marcus exhaled, rubbing a hand down his face. "Lysella, are you sure?" She swallowed, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "I can feel it." The procedure, his experiment, their gamble, had worked too well. Her body was no longer bound by the genetic barriers of her people. It had accepted the change, adapted, evolved. And now, inside her, something new had begun to grow. A hybrid life. A child that should have never been possible. The weight of it settled over them like the cold vacuum beyond the ship's walls. Marcus exhaled, his fingers tightening around the console edge. "We need to confirm it. Medbay scan." Lysella hesitated. A part of her didn't want confirmation, because if it was true, if she really was carrying a child, it meant there was no going back, no undoing what they had done. But she nodded. The medbay was sterile, humming with soft artificial light. Queen Azareth stood near the entrance, arms crossed, golden eyes sharp. She had been silent when Lysella had told her. Silent and unreadable. Now, as Marcus adjusted the scanner, she spoke at last. "You understand what this means." Lysella glanced at her mother. "I do." Azareth's expression remained unreadable. "Do you?" A heartbeat of tension. Then the scan results flickered to life. Marcus leaned forward, eyes scanning the data. His face paled. "It's true," he murmured. "You're pregnant." Lysella closed her eyes. Azareth's jaw tightened, but still, she showed no outward emotion. "This child," she said, measured and slow, "is an impossibility, a genetic anomaly, a being that neither Xiphorian nor human science can predict." Lysella placed a protective hand over her abdomen. "It's my child." Azareth's gaze darkened. "It is also a symbol." Marcus frowned. "A symbol?" Azareth turned to him. "You are a scientist, Dr. Hale. You understand how dangerous knowledge can be." Marcus stiffened. "Are you saying—" "This child will change everything," Azareth interrupted. "The existence of a human-Xiphorian hybrid will not go unnoticed. Our enemies, Varitha's remaining loyalists, the Council, even the Xiphorian people, will see this as a threat." Lysella's voice was steady. "Let them." Azareth's golden eyes met hers. "They will try to take it from you." Lysella's fingers curled into fists. Marcus exhaled. "Then we don't let them." The Queen's flagship, one of the last remaining vessels of the Xiphorian royal fleet, drifted in the black, hidden among the wreckage of their fallen homeworld. The survivors aboard were few but loyal. Soldiers, scientists, political exiles, those who had chosen to follow their true queen rather than submit to Varitha's usurpers. But they were not enough to retake the empire, and Lysella knew it. She sat in the war room, staring at the hollow display. Maps of the sector, reports from their spies, intercepted transmissions from the new regime. The Xiphorian Empire was fractured but still powerful. And Varitha's death had not ended the threat. His allies had merely stepped forward to take his place. "We need support," General Kelsar said, his forearms crossed, his expression grim. "Resources, weapons, an army." "We don't have an army," Marcus pointed out. Lysella leaned forward. "Then we find one." Silence. The queen regarded her daughter. "You would trust outsiders?" Lysella's gaze didn't waver. "We have no choice." Marcus sighed, rubbing his temples. "All right, let's say we do this. Who exactly are we reaching out to? Because last I checked, most of the galaxy wasn't fond of Xiphorian diplomacy." Kelsar gave a humorless smile. "The syndicates." Marcus blinked. "The criminal syndicates?" Kelsar nodded. "Pirates, mercenaries, war profiteers, the ones who thrive in chaos. If we offer them something valuable enough, they will fight for us." Azareth frowned. "It is dangerous." Lysella's voice was unwavering. "So is doing nothing." Marcus sighed. "All right, suppose we do find someone willing to fight. What do we offer them?" Lysella exhaled. Then, slowly, she placed a hand over her abdomen. Marcus froze. Azareth's eyes widened slightly, the first true hint of reaction. Kelsar inhaled sharply. "You wouldn't." Lysella met their gazes. "This child," she said, voice steady, "is the first of its kind. A genetic bridge between two species. A miracle." Her expression hardened. "And the most valuable bargaining chip in the galaxy." They set course for the outer rim. The journey was tense, the weight of Lysella's decision pressing upon them all. Marcus tried to talk to her, tried to reason with her. "You can't just trade your child away for soldiers," he argued one night in her quarters. She turned to him, her gaze unreadable. "I am not trading it, Marcus. I am securing its future." He shook his head. "You don't even know what they'll demand. What if they want to experiment on it? What if they see it as some kind of ultimate weapon?" Lysella's expression darkened. "Then I will make sure they understand who they are dealing with." Marcus exhaled, rubbing his temples. "This isn't just science anymore, Lysella. This is—" She stepped closer. "It never was just science, Marcus." A silence stretched between them. Then, softer, she murmured, "You changed me. You made this possible." He swallowed. "And now I'm afraid of what we've done." Her gaze held his. Then, finally, she reached out, just for a moment, her fingers brushing his. A fleeting touch, nothing more. Then she turned away. The ship continued forward, toward an uncertain fate. And in the darkness, a war for the future of two species was about to begin. The meeting was set in the dead void between systems, far from prying eyes. Their destination, Harrow's Maw, an asteroid-turned-criminal citadel deep within the lawless sectors of the Outer Rim. A place where warlords, smugglers, and mercenaries brokered deals in shadows, bound only by the unspoken rule. Gold and power mattered more than honor. Lysella stood at the viewport as the asteroid loomed ahead, its jagged surface laced with glowing docking bays and defense turrets. She felt Marcus approach behind her, his presence tense. "This is a bad idea," he muttered. Lysella didn't turn. "It's our only option." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "And what's the plan? We walk in and say, 'Hey, want to fight a galactic empire in exchange for an unborn miracle baby?'" She finally looked at him, her expression unreadable. "If that's what it takes." Marcus exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "Lysella." She held up a hand. "We're here." The docking clamps engaged. The ship shuddered as it locked into place. Outside, a welcoming committee was waiting. And by welcoming committee, she meant a dozen heavily armed enforcers flanking Kazik Rel, High Warlord of the Black Sun Syndicate, one of the most feared criminal empires in the galaxy. He was massive, even by alien standards. A Vorkan, his reptilian hide covered in obsidian scales, his glowing cybernetic eye scanning them like prey. Well, Kazik rumbled, his voice deep and edged with amusement. "Royalty graces my doorstep. And a human. Interesting." Lysella stepped forward. "We need to talk." Kazik's fang grin widened. Oh, princess, we will talk. The negotiations took place in Kazik's private chambers, a sprawling, dimly lit hall filled with artifacts of war and conquest. Marcus stayed close to Lysella, eyes wary, while Queen Azareth and General Kelsar observed from the shadows. Kazik lounged on his throne-like chair, watching them like a predator savoring its meal. I've heard whispers of your plight, he mused, swirling a goblet of dark liquid. Varitha's usurpers tighten their grip, and your so-called empire fractures. You need soldiers. Lysella met his gaze evenly. And you need power. Kazik chuckled. Everyone needs power, princess. The question is, what are you offering that's worth my trouble? Lysella took a breath. Then, with calculated precision, she placed a small hollow emitter on the table between them. A scan projection of her child's genetic code flickered to life. Kazik's cybernetic eye whirred as he studied the data, and for the first time, his smirk faded. What is this? He murmured. Lysella's voice was steady. The first viable human-Xiphorian hybrid. A being that should not exist. A genetic bridge between two species. She leaned forward. And the most valuable asset in the galaxy. Silence. Then Kazik let out a slow, dangerous chuckle. You realize what you're playing with. Lysella didn't blink. Do you? Kazik leaned back, his expression unreadable. Then he glanced at Marcus. And you? Human? You created this? Marcus clenched his jaw. I helped. Kazik studied him for a moment, then exhaled. Fascinating. This child is more than a miracle. It's leverage, power, evolution. His golden eye gleamed. You're offering me something priceless. Lysella nodded. In exchange for an army. Kazik was silent for a long time. Then, finally, he grinned. Done. The Black Sun Syndicate did not operate like an empire. It was a swarm. Mercenaries, warlords, bounty hunters, and exiled soldiers, all bound by profit and chaos. Lysella and Marcus spent the next days witnessing their new allies prepare for war. But there was a price. Kazik had agreed to lend his forces, but in return, he wanted a stake in the future of the hybrid child. Marcus argued, You're treating an unborn baby like a commodity. Kazik merely grinned. Everything is a commodity, Doctor. This child is the key to something far greater than you understand. Lysella met Marcus's furious gaze. This is necessary. His jaw tightened. You can't be okay with this. She exhaled. I'm not. A pause. Then, quieter, she added. But I will do anything to win. Marcus turned away, his stomach twisting. This war wasn't just about reclaiming a throne anymore. It was about something far bigger. And he wasn't sure any of them were ready for what came next. News of the Black Sun Alliance spread faster than expected. Too fast. Because someone had betrayed them. The ambush came during a strategic meeting, when Lysella and Marcus were aboard the flagship. The Imperial fleet, now under the rule of the new Council of Lords, descended like a storm. The attack was swift, precise, ruthless. Explosions rocked the ship. The lights flickered as the shields buckled under the relentless bombardment. Marcus barely had time to grab Lysella before the ship's systems screamed with emergency alerts. We have a breach. Kelsar's voice crackled through the comms. They're boarding us. Lysella's blood turned cold. The enemy had come for her. And her unborn child. The blast doors groaned. Marcus and Lysella ran, weapons drawn, their footsteps echoing through the corridors. Outside the ship, Kazik's fleet clashed with the Imperials, the void alight with fire and destruction. They rounded a corner and froze. Standing in the breach, flanked by elite royal guards, was a figure Lysella should not be seeing. Lord Varith. Alive. Marcus's breath caught. What the hell? Varitha's smirk was slow, cruel. Surprised, he mused. His golden eyes gleamed, but they were different now, glowing with an unnatural energy. His wounds were healed. His body augmented. Lysella's stomach turned. You're dead. Varith chuckled. I was. But death is such a fragile thing. Then he stepped forward, and in his hand, he held a stasis device, one tuned to a single genetic frequency. Lysella's frequency. She felt it before she saw it. a pull deep in her core. And suddenly, pain ripped through her, a violent, electric force that sent her to her knees. Marcus lunged toward her, but Varitha's guards intercepted him. The traitor knelt, whispering to Lysella as her vision blurred. "You thought you were special," he murmured. "But your child, oh princess, your child belongs to me now." Lysella's world fractured, and the war for the future truly began. Pain. It tore through Lysella's body, raw and electric, as Varitha's stasis device sent waves of agony through her cells. She gritted her teeth, fighting to stay conscious. Her child, felt the pull, a force unnatural and ancient, and she could feel its tiny heartbeat hammering inside her like a war drum. Varith leaned close, his golden eyes gleaming with something twisted. "You are no longer the future, Lysella. You are obsolete. But your child? That is something far greater." With a burst of desperation, Lysella forced her arm up and slammed her blade into Varitha's side. He grunted, stumbling back, but he did not fall. Marcus, freed from his captors in the chaos, lunged forward and shot the stasis device out of Varitha's hand. Sparks flew as the device shattered against the steel floor. Lysella gasped as the force holding her in place released. The power in her veins, the hybrid DNA Marcus had given her, reacted. A sudden, unfathomable strength surged through her. Her body was no longer bound by the genetic weaknesses of her ancestors. She was something new, and she was done running. Varith snarled, his hands flickering with strange energy, unnatural enhancements coursing through his altered flesh. But Lysella was faster. She moved with impossible speed, dodging his first strike and landing a crushing blow to his ribs. His enhanced bones should have withstood it, but they didn't. Varith staggered. For the first time, he looked afraid. Lysella's golden eyes glowed, something primal awakening in her blood. "You think you control the future?" she hissed. "You don't even belong in it." With one final strike, she drove her blade through his chest. Varith gasped, blood bubbling from his lips. He tried to speak, perhaps a curse, perhaps a final defiance, but no words came. Lysella twisted the blade, and Lord Varith, once the usurper of her throne, crumpled to the floor, dead. For real this time. The battle outside raged on, but Lysella's body had reached its limit. Marcus barely caught her as she collapsed, his hands slick with sweat and blood. "Lysella," he whispered, his voice tight with fear. Her breath came in ragged gasps. It was happening. The stress, the battle, the power surging through her. It had triggered labor. Marcus's mind raced. They had no time, no medbay, no sterile environment. But Lysella's grip tightened on his arm. Her voice was weak, but her eyes were clear. "You'll take care of our child," she whispered, "no matter what." Marcus shook his head, panic rising. "No, don't say that. You're going to be fine." She just smiled. Then the pain took her completely. Hours later, aboard the surviving flagship, a child's cry echoed through the halls. Marcus held the newborn in his arms, his entire body trembling. The child, half human, half Cyphorian, had golden eyes that shimmered like stardust, and skin that carried the iridescent glow of Lysella's people. A miracle, a new beginning. Lysella, weak but alive, reached out. Marcus gently placed the child in her arms. She cradled her newborn, pressing a trembling kiss to its forehead. "My little star," she whispered. Azareth stepped forward, gazing down at the child with an unreadable expression. Then, slowly, the queen knelt before Lysella and the infant. "My queen," she murmured. Lysella looked up, startled. "Mother." But Azareth shook her head. "The empire we once knew is gone. But this child, your child, represents something greater than a throne." Her golden eyes softened. "A new age." Lysella exhaled, clutching the baby close. She understood now. She had not just fought for her people. She had created a new one. Years passed. The Zyphorian Empire did not return as it once was. Instead, a new power rose, one built not on bloodlines, but on evolution. Lysella's child, the first hybrid of its kind, became a symbol, a beacon for those who no longer fit into the old ways. Marcus stayed by her side, raising their child together, guiding a species toward a future no one had foreseen. And somewhere, in the deep black void of space, the galaxy watched. The age of kings and queens was over. The age of hybrids had begun.